Everybody, welcome to the Pod Sounds Cool channel, the place to be for all things podcasting. Here in our channel, you can find all the tools you need to plan, produce, and promote your podcast. Welcome. Today we have a workshop, an hour workshop. We're gonna try to keep it under an hour, but we'll see.
We'll see. It could be an hour and 15 minutes. Won't be much longer than that. Mm-hmm. Throughout this workshop, obviously if you can't hang out for the whole hour and 15 minutes, hour that it is, this will be available on our YouTube channel, so you can always come back and digest it in pieces. Mm-hmm. But our hope with this workshop is that we're gonna, from start to finish, we're gonna get you
up and running with
your podcast, mm-hmm. and get you out of the gates with a brand new baby podcast. And we decided during this time for this If Life Gives You Lemons Start a Podcast workshop that we're doing, during this time where there's so much going on in the world and a lot of people are scared, a lot of people are stuck in their homes and everything else, we thought we would cancel our regular content and kind of put something together for the community, mm-hmm. to just get your mind set on staying connected, staying focused, and maybe doing some house cleaning, or hey, starting that podcast that you've had on the back burner. So
yeah, we started thinking yesterday if there was a way for us to help our community, to help our podskis to stay connected and to, stay in good spirits and motivated and stay connected with their people and their communities. And what better way than through a podcast and starting a podcast. 2 days ago, we had our first year anniversary. And a year ago, not even in my wildest dreams, I would have thought that I would be doing a workshop, a live workshop, and mm-hmm. that I would be helping people to start their shows, and that I would be even in front of a camera. So the benefits of starting a podcast, thanks to our podcast, we have a business. Mm-hmm. Thanks to our podcast, we have a community. Thanks mm-hmm. to our podcast, we have made long-lasting friendships. And thanks to our podcast, we're able to be here today to help you start your own and
yes.
to stay connected. And we're so happy to be here and to spend the next hour with you. With that being said, we have a lot to cover. Like Steven said, if you get tired of seeing our faces, you can come back and replay this video. Also, you can, if we're going too fast, you can download the slides for this presentation. And we'll leave all those links on the comments of this video, on the description of this video. Yep. So you can click on those links and download the slides and also other things that we have for you.
Yes, and mm-hmm. also we're going to be stopping periodically. We'll get through a couple slides and then we'll stop and check out the comments.
Yeah, because we need to drink water.
Yeah, so we need to drink water. And it looks like we've got Whitney Gonzalez. Hey, you're totally welcome, Whitney. Hopefully you find this enjoyable. We got Michael Crow. Sorry I didn't run into you at Podfest. And then the Madhouse joined as well. So let's have a lot of fun. Let's get our podcasting up. Talk amongst each other, and we'll stop every so often with our slides to mm-hmm. respond to any questions that you have. So why don't we get into it?
Yes.
I'm ready.
Yes, let's do it. So, we have a lot to cover.
Welcome. We're going to start with a quote mm-hmm. from our good buddy, Eric Hunley. Mm-hmm. In the end, podcasting means you're never going to be completely alone.
Mm-hmm. So Eric was featured in one of the podcasts on a podcast publication, and mm-hmm. his podcast is on structure. And one of the things that he said during his interview is that you will never be completely alone mm-hmm. if you start a podcast. And what a profound thing to say. I've been quoting him all over the place mm-hmm. because it's true. Even if you are, socially awkward like we are,
mm-hmm.
introverted, if you, don't have time to be social, then podcasting just opens the doors for networking and being in contact with other people.
Yeah.
And why when life when life gives you lemons, why the title? It came to us yesterday that in the midst of what's happening, then let's just keep our spirits up. Let's just keep our positivity, and let's focus on the things that matter, on the which is connection and our self-development, our self-care, and how we can give
Yeah.
to others and contribute and to grow
And
personally,
our creativity.
professionally in our businesses.
Yep. And so in this workshop, you're going to learn. We're going to start with planning and development. And then under that, we'll do finding a niche, competitor analysis, picking a name, and structure. Then we're going to get into branding and artwork. And then I actually this morning filmed a quick tutorial about affordable podcast equipment and software. I figured it'd probably be best to pre-record that so I could chop it up a little bit for time purposes. So that'll be fun. That's where we talk about USB microphones and Reaper, which is a really fun podcast editing software. And then we're going to finish up by talking about choosing a web post and setting a launch date or launch strategy, basically. So it's going to be really fun, and we'll stop every so often and talk about that. But why don't we get into the first part, which is planning and development.
Are we ready?
I'm ready. I'm ready to plan.
Let's do this.
And develop. Okay, so planning and development.
Yes.
The first thing when you're planning and developing, it usually comes from an idea, right? So there are many of us that want to start a podcast really bad. We're usually podcast listeners, but we haven't really refined our topic. So that's something you could do during this stage as well too. And that's a good place to start. There is, why do I want to start a podcast?
Yeah. So that's the thing about podcasting. Some people may come with the idea, I want to podcast about this specific topic. And some others may come to podcasting because of how fun the platform is without having any idea of what topic to choose for the podcast. So the first question, if you're struggling a little bit with the topic for your show, even if you're certain, I would advise you to do this. And I'm going to need that slide
Oh, you're going to need that slide back.
I'm
There you
blind.
go.
Yeah, thank you. So the first question that you need to ask yourself is whether is why you want to start a podcast. What's the reason behind starting a podcast? Is it because you want to promote your business? Is it because you want to connect with friends? Is it because you have a message? Is it because you want to inspire other people? Whatever the reason, it's very important for you to have that, to write that down. And I usually tell my clients, sit down. There's a form that I send to my clients and they have to sit down and fill it out. This is very important. This is not to be taken lightly. And it's fun too.
Yeah, it's fun. And so you want to figure out your why.
You want to figure out your why.
But usually the why is, it's already there. And then after you figure out your why, you want to start making a list of your passions, your skills, what you're good at. This is really cool because then you start to realize, man, I actually know a lot. And then what are some things that you're so passionate about that you would like to become an expert in? So if you're not an expert in something yet, but it's one of your biggest passions, then that would be a perfect topic or an idea for your podcast. And then after you've sort of made a list of all of that, you can define what kind of content creator you'll be.
Yes. And this is for those who are like, I don't have anything to teach. I don't have anything to say. Those who are struggling with the famous imposter syndrome. So there's three types of professionals that you, three types of content creators that you can be, or a podcast host, or whatever you want to call it. The first time is the content curator. This is the person who is not an expert, who really doesn't have the credentials, but has a passion and has the connections. So let's say I'm very passionate about, and I'm going to use this example throughout the workshop, and I've been using that as an example. I don't know why, but let's say I'm very passionate about tango. But I'm not very well versed about the tango industry. Maybe I took some tango classes, but that's all I've done. I can bring to my show tango experts, dancers, people who have been involved in the tango industry for years. people who are very well versed in the technique and the history of tango. All that I can do interviews, and as I go, I'm building my knowledge and my expertise about this thing that I feel passionate about. So that's the content curator.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna, so that's curation. You're curating.
You're curating content.
You're
expertise.
a conduit, a mediator of experts. So you're bringing experts to your audience. And then the second type is the professional.
The professional is that you have the credentials, you have the expertise and the skills, and you want to have a podcast because you want to educate your audience. So let's say you're a doctor, a lawyer, an audio engineer, like in our case, Steven, that was his whole motivation for starting a podcast was to educate people, podcasters, on how to get better audio.
Yep.
So if you have any kind of credentials, and right now, people who are, doctors, scientists, people who are in wellness, people who have all the skills and tools and knowledge, that those people can really, really help their communities by sharing what they have learned.
Yeah, and then the other one is role model, and we find this a lot. We were just at Podfest, like our buddy there on YouTube insinuated, and that's the role model. So this is like if you've been through it.
If you've been through it.
If you, it's the survivor, or and there, we met so many people like that who were suffering from illnesses, or what was it, the Boob podcast?
Mothers with children with autism.
Yeah, and there was this. It's called, I forget the name. It's great. It was a woman who'd survived breast cancer. It's called like the Boob Report, I think is what it's called, and that's a really good place too. So you can start to see, just looking at a little bit of this, finding your niche, which is your group of people, and doing a little research and some little inward looking, that it's like, wow, actually, yeah, I have a lot of material that I can podcast about. So after we've done that, then we're going to move on to market research. And there's a few tools that we really like for market research.
Market research is so, so important. Don't get into podcasting without doing at least a little bit of market research.
A little bit, yep.
It's so important and so key for the success and longevity of your show.
And some of the tools that we've used for this is answerthepublic.com. Answer the Public's really kind of helps with keywords, but it shows you search queries. So you could put in Veronica's example, tango. You could put in tango, and it'll show you all these prepositions, all these different queries that people search for. Where did tango originate? And it also shows you the search volume, so you can see how popular certain questions are. This starts to let you know, clue you in on what is it surrounding your topic that people are interested in. Then, of course, there's public forums like Quora.
Sorry to interrupt you. Answer the Public is free. The three searches a day.
3 searches a day,
so far as the last time I used them.
And then, of course, there's public forums like Quora or Reddit. Quora is really great. It also shows you questions people are asking around topics. And then Facebook groups are huge. Probably in our experience. And
they've been so helpful. I mean, there's a Facebook group for pretty much, everything.
For everything, yep.
You can request to be a member of these Facebook groups and start interacting with the members in that community and start asking questions and start finding your people there.
Yeah. And that's really great. And then there's this idea of an ideal listener. And we really love this idea of describing your ideal listener. And there's actually a form for this too that we've given to clients before as well, where you talk about, really imagine them as if they're a single person. And by ideal listener, we mean the person that you most imagine would be the super fan of your podcast. So are they a man or a woman? Or what's their age? And this is really important because when you're thinking about your ideal listener, this is going to shape and change your podcast completely. And so many people get into podcasting without really even knowing who they're creating their podcast for. But let's go back to the example of Veronica's idea. We always use this fake podcast that we actually made an episode of.
Yeah, Tango with Veronica.
It's called Tango with Veronica. We use it for all of our tutorials and stuff. So if she is making this podcast about tango and her ideal listener is in their 20s, early to mid 20s, then the whole content of her show is going to be different, right? The music will be different. The tone that she speaks in will be different. But if she's making it for an ideal listener that's in their mid to late 40s or 50s or 60s, like in the 50s and 60s case, these are people who grew up with radio. They're going to want more organized structure. They're going to want a little bit more tasteful or classical music or something, right? So that's why it's really important to have a very clear idea and to answer the questions like,
Yeah, these are people like if my niche are people over 50 or 60, I know that they're retired and I know that they're going to be consuming my podcast more than somebody who has a full-time job. And so all those little details, the more you get into the details of what your ideal listener looks like is Susie. Susie's in her 30s.
yeah,
Susie likes yoga.
Yeah.
Susie likes meditation.
this is the kind of music she likes.
This is the kind of music she likes. And then that is just going to change. It's not set on stone. It's going to change the more you do your research and the more you produce your podcast, then you're going to find more and more details about your audience. It's pretty exciting. I love market research.
And then finally, because we need to move on from this
Yes.
slide for sure, is monetization.
Big one.
And this is a big one, but really here at this point, when you're just starting, it's just to kind of start brainstorming about
It's just a thought.
monetization. It's just to get the juice flowing, to get the water simmering or whatever, right? And that's just looking at other podcasts and other people who are doing similar things and having an idea of like, how can your topic wind up making money for you? So if you're going to have a podcast about tango, is there a way you can maybe make tango an online book that you can sell? Or what are some things that could be directly related to your podcast in the future that you could monetize?
Yeah, ask yourself, does this subject have the potential to monetize in the future?
And that's important because even though so many of us get into podcasting for the joy, because we want to spread a message, because we feel compelled, because it's just a hobby or it's fun, a reason to get together with friends, and we might even not have the best mindset when it comes to money, so we just want a creative outlet. It's important because if your podcast has the potential for monetizing, it's going to keep you in it in the long run, and it'll keep you from pod fading and all of that. So before we pop over
I'll
to
help you grow.
Yeah, and help you grow. Before we pop over to competitor analysis, let's see what we got. You're very welcome, Faith West, for doing it.
Hi, Faith.
Oh, great. I'm so glad you're here, Dare. And we've got Brooklyn here too. So cool. And like I said, you guys just keep talking among yourselves. If there's any specific questions you have, things that are confusing to you as we go along with this, drop them and we'll pop in every so often and try to answer those. So I don't know. Should we keep going? Maybe let's throw a little music in just for a minute while we bust over to this next slide. So competitor analysis. Why is it important, Veronica?
So competitor analysis is just as important as market research. With your competitor analysis, you're going to find out, it's going to give you a closer look into the shows, into other shows in the same category. But you don't stop right there. Then you're going to look deeper into their social media, how many followers they have, how are they a very engaged audience. You can gather information about popularity and content and what are some of the things that they're doing wrong, what are some of the things that they're doing right. Read their reviews, look at the ratings. See what you can apply and adapt, and also what's that difference. I call it sus. Your sauce.
What's your special sauce,
your
right?
special sauce that you can bring to the table that will set you apart from your competitors. There are some people that don't like to call them competition.
I like to call them friends.
But it's just all those other shows who would be sharing your niche with you.
Yeah.
It's a very good thing to know who they are, because you are going to make connections with them. You're going to do networking. You
might be on their show.
You may be on their
You'll
show.
have
You
them
may
on your
buy
show.
them on your show. So be aware of your competitors.
Yeah, and it's so much easier to just get off on a more powerful foot if you know what other people are doing.
And then the other thing is that you can, if you have created social media for your podcast already, or you can use your own social media, you can go to their social media and start interacting with their followers. There's nothing wrong with that. They're not, the followers don't belong to them. You have freedom of choice. You can, follow people today and unfollow them tomorrow, or stop listening to a podcast because you don't like it anymore. So there's nothing wrong with you going and interacting with those people,
Yeah.
and connecting and engaging.
And I love that Veronica brings this point up because part of competitor analysis. So let's say there's another podcast about tangoing in Argentina. So she can find their account on Twitter, say, and then she can go into their followers. And by scrolling through their followers, she can see who enjoys that show. And then those are perfect people, or even in a Facebook, those are perfect people to maybe send them a survey so that you can give them a survey to get a stronger understanding of your ideal listener.
Yeah, we're not going to get too much into
Surveys and things like that. Yeah,
but that's part of what we do with our clients, and it gives a lot of good insight.
a lot of good insights.
Insight.
So finally, with competitor analysis, tools that you can use to help with this is all the different podcast directories.
So yeah, we use all the different podcast directories, the main ones.
And then Podchaser and Google. See if you can find podcasts about tango. And Google is improving every day. They are developing their technology with podcast discovery, which is awesome news. And you've probably noticed that the podcasts are now populating actually on the Google page, and you can
play them from there.
Play them right from there. But Google's algorithms, their bots, are going to start crawling podcast directories. So when they not only they crawl RSS feeds, which is how we host our podcast, but they're also listening too. So they actually are going through the audio. And so eventually the goal is that Google will answer queries with a podcast. So if you say like, how do I get better at tango? And you have an episode that says get better at tango, it'll pop up and your podcast will be an answer to people's queries there. So that's good. Why don't we move on to choosing a name?
Choosing the name.
Okay.
Fun.
This is the fun part, right? But it's also the painful part too, because sometimes you're like, I have the best
Don't
name
get
idea.
stuck.
There's this whole idea of killing your darlings, this don't be too precious. And also, yeah. But when choosing your name, we kind of have
And
this.
also, yeah.
Yeah, and also, yeah. And also, yeah.
So the three Eases.
The three
Eases.
Easy to
spell and pronounce, easy to remember, and easy to find.
Easy to find, yep.
If it's if it's not easy to pronounce, then people are going to have a hard time. It's going to be confusing. It's going to be hard for them to find you.
Yep.
If it's not easy to spell, how are they going to Google you? How are they going to find your website? How are they going to find you on the podcast directory? So keep it easy.
Yes, and just do that check. And then while you're doing checks, do a URL, domain, and social check.
Super important.
This is very important and surprisingly so overlooked. People will choose their name, make their podcast, put it into the directories before even checking if anybody else has the same name or similar names. And so you want to check your URL availability. So in the case of our example, go into GoDaddy or any of the domain people that sell you domain names. GoDaddy's great because they charge you like $2-3 for the first year. And search for tangowithveronica.com. If that's not available, maybe tangowithveronicapodcast.com or tangowithveronicapod.com. Then go to Twitter and see if Tango with Veronica or Veronica and Tango or something that. But what's really ideal is if you can have the same handle at all your social profiles and the same corresponding URL. So Veronica Tangos. Twitter is at Veronica Tangos. Instagram is at Veronica Tangos. You get what we're saying there, right?
Yeah, our website, for example, is Pod Sound School. Our social media, all our social media is Pod Sound School. Everything we do is
at
Pod Sound School.
And our website is podsoundschool.com.
So have that in mind.
And truthfully, we just got lucky with that because when we were first starting, we didn't think about this enough. And thank God we just got lucky with that, right? But so that helps with also easy to find because there's a big struggle in podcasts. There's a huge discoverability problem. So we want to make sure we're very easy to find.
Yes.
And the next thing to do is search Google and search Podchaser and look at Tango with Veronica and look at the first 3 pages. And this is also helpful. This is what our lawyer advised us to do with avoiding trademark infringement.
Yeah, you don't want to use the name of a similar name that other podcast is using. It doesn't have to be the exact name. Only this, if the name is similar, and that podcast or that host has trademarked that name, then that person can request the podcast directories to take your podcast down, and that can hurt you big time. And it has happened. We released a podcast episode a few weeks ago, a month ago, I think, with Taylor Timmons. She's an IP attorney in LA, and she talked all the things regarding to trademark, regarding to copyright,
music in your podcast and all that.
Publicity rights, and all of those things that as podcasters we need to know.
We'll leave that link on this page of this video. So if you go to show more, or if you go to the description, once we're done here, we're going to load up a bunch of links, extra resources for you guys, free downloads and stuff like that too. So let's keep moving along because we got a lot to get through. It's kind of a challenge here. Let's talk about structure. So with structure, here's where now you've settled on a name. You're ready to go. Now we got to start thinking about your podcast episodes, meaning are they going to be episodic or serialized? That means, is it a weekly thing or is it a story? So if you're just like a season, like a Netflix series, right, would be the serialized version. Is it going to be scripted or non-scripted?
So, for example, our podcast is episodic. Every week we release an episode. There are certain things that you learn throughout that episode. It's over. Then the next week we release another episode with something different. So it doesn't matter like which order you listen to our podcast. It's just one.
It comes up. The most recent episode comes up at the top, right?
And if it's serialized, it's more like a story.
Like a story.
A good example would be like the story of Santa Marie, which is each episode tells a little bit of the story, and at the end of 5 or 6 episodes,
it's over, right? Or another season comes up,
another
and then you
season
have another
comes
story, like a television series, right? And then scripted or non-scripted. And if you're going to do scripted, this has its own struggles because you write a script and then you want to get into script writing.
Takes a lot of time.
Yeah, but it's good for writers. And it's, I would say, might even be a little bit easier. I don't know. They're both hard.
I had my struggles with recording my voice and getting in front of the microphone, and scripting my episodes was of a lot of help for me because I just have to read my script. With that being said, it's a little bit of a struggle because you don't want to sound too scripted. You don't want to sound like you're reading from a paper. So your inflections and intonation
and things like that.
That you have to play with those. But it's just like, it's a matter of practice. Do it. And look at me now.
And with
I'm the same. Just kidding. I haven't made any progress.
With unscripted, the challenges are the nightmare it causes in editing later.
Oh, yes.
And also the challenges of losing your audience because you go on tangents. And once you get behind a microphone, you'll realize how fun and exhilarating it is. And you can talk for 2 hours. It's amazing. And then your poor editor, or if you're the editor, you're going to have to sift through that 2 hours, try to turn it into a story. So if you're going to do an unscripted podcast, make sure that you employ outlines and that you and your co-host or anybody you're interviewing at least kind of know the basic subjects and about how long you're supposed to talk about each of those subjects and piece it together in a story format because we're trying to provide a really good experience for our ideal listener, right?
Yeah, it's all about the experience that you're providing to your audience.
And I can
forget about you. You get to have a little bit of fun. But when it comes to just you, then you just can't talk for 2 hours. That's just not good.
Yeah. So we're kind of a little bit behind here. This is taking a little bit longer than I thought. But before we get into branding, let's see if we have any comments.
Don't worry, Matt House. You can come back and watch this.
Oh, yeah. Family duty calls. We understand.
I know.
He's they have to catch up on it later.
Okay.
So that's great.
Good. So frequency. Frequency depends of how much time you have to produce your podcast. It takes a lot of time to sit down and to, put an episode together, record the episode, then you have to edit, then you have to publish it, then you have to promote it. So it depends on of how much time you have to dedicate to grow your podcast, or how other things you're willing to sacrifice in order to nurture this project that is going to bring you so many good opportunities. Are you going to do it once a week? Are you going to do it every other week? That is just up to you and your time.
Yeah, and I think
I would do it if I would do it every week. That's how
Every
you see
week.
results.
every week is how you really get build your audience quicker. But you can also do things like batch record. So when you're structuring, it's hard to know exactly how long it's going to take you, and that's why I always recommend like doing a bunch of practice episodes and just having fun and getting started and start goofing off, even if it's just with your phone. But it's hard to know. But once you know about how long it takes you to record an episode, you can batch record a bunch of them so that you have 4 or 5 weeks in advance and to release and schedule onto your into your podcast, right? So now let's pop over into some other structuring, which is intros and outros. And now you're gonna, when you're talking about these kind of things and the thesis statement and talking points, and is this structure right for your ideal listener? All these things that we're talking about really have to do with the design and the feel of your show, which really go into branding too, which we're about to get into as well. And with the intro and outro, that's just about what you need to include in your intro, what you need to include in your outro, which also has to do with your thesis statement. Why should people be listening to your podcast?
And make sure you also include call to actions. Listen and subscribe. Follow me on social media.
Yeah.
Remember, always include a call to action on your podcast.
And your podcast. So let's pop over to branding.
Branding, my favorite.
Yes.
And this is just, there's so much to talk about, but this is just a quick workshop. To get you a little bit up to speed. But branding is one of my marketing and branding are two of my most favorite things to do for my clients.
So what is branding?
So branding is like what makes you unique, what makes your podcast unique, and how you are showing up on social media and on the webs.
Unique, and then also what makes you recognizable.
What makes you recognizable?
It's your public image. So it's you, but it's almost like your alter ego in a way or something, right? So this, obviously, I think the first thing I think about with branding is colors, fonts, and then the music you're going to choose, the sound effects you're going to choose, which you could think of as audio branding, and then content, graphics, and logos. So that's your little micro content pieces that you're going to put out on social media on a weekly basis. There's lots that goes into this, and I know it can seem overwhelming, but don't worry. You just build piece by piece.
And don't be afraid to be different. Don't be afraid to use like scandalous colors and
really, what makes you you know?
What makes you, yes.
Know, if you want to use 100 colors, that's fine too. A lot of people have good results with picking 2 or 3 colors. And then you can have variations of those colors just so that you're very recognizable as people are mindlessly scrolling. They see that blue and green that you've chosen. It's like, oh, that's nice. And
also with audio branding, are you going to be using hip hop on your show?
Yeah.
Are you going to be using,
hardcore music,
metal or
soft acoustic guitar? And again, that's why with branding, you also want to think about who you are, but also
what's appealing to your audience.
What's appealing to your ideal customer avatar or your ideal listener, right? And then you're also now thinking about consistency with branding. So consistency throughout your social platforms, your website, your podcast, and all of that. And that gets a little bit, we'll touch on that a little bit more when we get into artwork. But then also your subject and your thesis statement is also part of your branding.
It's part of your branding.
So this, I think not only does it kind of seep into the design of your branding, but it's also directly part of your branding, because a lot of times your thesis statement will be the subtitle underneath your title. So ours used to be, I think we've changed it a little bit, but it used to be, what was it? I can't remember, but it was Pod Sound School, and then there's like a few lines.
Your ideas deserve the best audio.
Oh, yeah, your ideas deserve the best audio, because we were really going for those audio guys. But now we've we're doing everything. So we've sort of changed it.
Yeah. And so at one of the conferences that we recently went to, I think it was Podcast Movement in LA, one of the conferences that I went to was this, I forgot his name, but he was talking about branding and marketing and how, you hear people saying that content is king. He was saying like content plus marketing is plus branding is king, because if you like produce this amazing content but it's hard to find you, people won't remember you, then it won't get discovered. But if you have if you are the same throughout your social media, if you are the same on your website, then like, oh yeah, I remember the girl like throwing the lemons. Or I remember, oh, pod sounds cool, like play with this really vibrant colors.
They use like pink and
it's
blue
Veronica,
and yellow.
and it's Veronica and Steven. If you are your brand, then just do those things that will set you apart and also be uniform around
and then don't
your
be
social media presence.
To put yourself out there and be your brand. Also, start entertaining that right from the beginning. We've had many clients where we have to sort of help hold their hand and walk into the light of having their face be part of their podcast, because many podcasts are also inherently shy.
I mean, that if you're your brand, you're set for life.
Yeah.
Because there's nobody like you.
There's nobody like you. Let you shine. Let your whatever makes you most weird, most peculiar, most cute, most sexy, most fun.
Is it the big hair? Is it the
Is it the weird expressions and the flamboyant things you do with your hands? Just let it out, right? Okay, we better get into artwork because we're running late here. This could very well wind up being an hour and a half presentation. But hey, we're just pumping out value.
Okay, take it away.
Okay, take it away, Studio Steve. So artwork, I'm going to need a little bit of music to help me with this. So let's talk about tools first. Canva and the Adobe Suite are the ones we really like to use. If I were to put together a podcaster's toolkit, Canva would be one of the top ones. It's just perfect for all of your social media. You can type in specific dimensions into Canva. And for the pro version of Canva, it's like $9 a month. You get tons of different templates. All of the slides we've done, we used Canva today to design these. Pretty much all of our artwork, I'm switching between the Adobe Suite. And by the Adobe Suite, I mean, it's called the Creative Cloud. You pay $50 a month, or it's like $20 or $30 a month if you're a student. And you get access to Adobe Audition, which you may have heard of. It's a great audio program. Photoshop, Premiere, Character Animator, After Effects, Illustrator, and Lightroom. And when it comes to photos, Lightroom is so cool to make your photos burst and just look flavorful and delicious. And you mix Lightroom with Photoshop, and then you also throw it up and upload pictures to Canva, and it's like this beautiful trifecta. But if you can't afford all that and you also don't have a tremendous amount of time to learn 18 different softwares, then Canva. It's really intuitive. It's really great. Another tool that I forgot to mention here that we just discovered too is background remover.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and you actually find it by going remove.bg.
It's like magic.
That's really cool. So especially if the photos you take are relatively, there's a good difference between you and the background. So the background behind you isn't too cluttered or noisy. It just magically removes your background. What used to take me in Photoshop an hour to remove all the background around Veronica's hair and stuff is now just instant with background remover, which is cool. And then first impressions, right, Veronica? You want to, this kind of tells people what your podcast is about.
Yeah, so I like to compare the artwork for a podcast with the cover of a book. The cover of a book needs to like just tells me a little bit what the book is about, but cause curiosity and the just
kind of sum up like
just
hints.
Bring me the curiosity and the desire for me to open the book and see what's inside.
Yeah.
So play with colors, play with images. What else?
And you can also, one of the tools here that a lot of people employ is Fiverr. Fiverr is great for lots of reasons, but I think podcast cover art's a really good one because there's tons of artists on Fiverr.com that will do your podcast artwork for you and can help you with branding. You can also send them specific colors and stuff to choose
Yeah, your
from.
podcast cover art is part of your branding too.
Yeah, and then your specs, right? So I didn't put the specs up here. I should have, but it's 3,000 by 3,000 pixels. And that's why Canva is cool, because you can just type that right into Canva. An Instagram post is typically like 1080 by 1080 pixels. So it's like half the size. So you want 3,000 by 3,000. You want it to be in RGB color format. So it's a square image, RGB color format, and a JPEG or a PNG.
And those measurements are important because if they're not in compliance, that your podcast is not going to be.
Yeah,
approved,
they have to.
Right?
They have to be in compliance, especially if you want your podcast to be considered to be featured on Apple and other things like that. It has to be in compliance. So 3,000 by 3,000 pixels will get you a really nice, attractive picture. And so that's important with artwork. And then here's a really good time while you're creating your episode artwork to also commission maybe that same person on Fiverr, or to spend some time creating a bunch of other artwork for social, create artwork
On your website.
Yeah, so in your website and your social banners and things like that. This is another reason that Canva is so useful, because it has the dimensions for all those things. So it'll say like Twitter post, and you go in there and it has all these templates you can pick off of, and then it also has like Twitter header, has like YouTube banner, Instagram post, Instagram story, every different type of dimension that you see all over social media. It can help you put those together. And then what you can do is you can kind of create templates and assets. And earlier we were talking about intro and outro, and in my little tutorial video I talk about audio assets. But another thing is episode artwork. So you have the cover for your podcast. Start thinking about some episode covers. And with the episode, it could be like a template that you have in Canva. So it's pretty much always the same, but it's just a little bit different. Maybe you throw a different picture of a guest up each time. So it only takes you like an extra 2 minutes in your workflow each week to create a unique piece of artwork for each episode. And that's really cool. And that's about it for artwork. And we're about to move on to gear, the gear portion. Like I mentioned, this is a pre-recorded video we're going to play for you guys that I made this morning. But it's very informative.
Yeah, I hope you guys are finding this useful. For those of you who like more structure and accountability and dive a lot deeper on this subjects, and just like have us close teaching you things and really focusing on having a podcast in 6 weeks. We're launching our course in May.
Yeah, we're launching a course in May, which dives into each of these things a lot more, and we're really excited about that.
By the end of 6 weeks, you're going to have a branded podcast with
a very professional,
very
podcast.
strong social media presence, and sounding professional, and all of these things will just like walk with you, walk the walk, and teach you. And we're only taking a limited
amount of students.
It's just because we want to give them all our attention.
Yeah, so if you're interested in getting on the wait list or finding out more information about that, it's at podcastingsmart.com. And we'll leave that links in here too. And if you just
for my non-DIYers.
Yeah, for the non-DIYers. And included in that, there's going to be it's like a boot camp, basically. Very intensive training in editing and audio editing as well, where there's going to be templates and presets that you can include into your digital audio workstation, so that you don't have to learn about too much about compression and EQ and all that stuff. So,
and also the step-by-step of all of these things that we're covering today.
Oh, you're totally welcome, Ellis. And now we're about to get into, I think this is about 20 minutes or so of audio stuff. So make sure you stick around here. We're talking about affordable audio equipment. A little tutorial I did this morning. Looks like Whitney let us know that Canva's Pro version has a remove background feature. Oh,
Whitney.
Yes.
Thank you, Whitney.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to look at that, because I've been paying remove background. They charge you a certain amount of money for each image. So we're going to look into that.
But they're free too, no?
No, I don't know. Free just for, no, they're not free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, remove background.
Okay, so are we ready to get into the technical stuff? If you're anything like me, you're just gonna need a little bit of caffeine.
Yeah, you're going to need a little bit of caffeine, but don't worry.
But you're in good hands.
Take a deep breath. We're going to get into some technical stuff. This is definitely going to go a little bit over our hour. We'll probably be closer to an hour and 20 minutes by the time we're done with all this. When we get back from the technical stuff, we are going to finish up by talking about how to choose a web host, and then finally some launch strategies. So really fun stuff. Do a couple stretches, because there's some information that's going to go in there. And the technical stuff, as we've been doing surveys ourselves and stuff, it's the learning the editing software is really what intimidates people from getting into podcasting. So let's just bust over to my frosty mug earlier this morning.
You can tell that it was way too early for him.
You can tell that it was early. Any time before noon is just...
Kilo face.
Yeah. Oh, boy. She's seeing the picture of it right now. It's pretty horrible. So here you go, guys.
Okay, guys, let's do some podcasting gear. So for this workshop, we're talking about how we can get started for under $100. So we're going to go with the simplest of podcasting setups, and that is going to be USB microphones. Before we get into that though, one thing you need to know about microphones is that there's two different types of microphones. There's condenser microphones and there's dynamic microphones. Condenser microphones are like the studio microphone. They pick up a lot more sound, they're more sensitive, so they work really well in rooms that are treated with sound panels or a lot of curtains, rooms that don't have a lot of bare walls and a lot of reflection and reverb going on. Dynamic microphones are better for rooms that aren't in a recording studio, rooms that we find in our house, or rooms that most podcasters are going to be recording their podcast in. For this reason, dynamic microphones are usually always a better choice for independent podcasters. That's why the microphone I'm going to suggest is the Samson Q2U. This is about $50 you can pick this up for, and it is a USB microphone. But it is also an XLR microphone. If you look at the bottom here, you'll see that there's a USB output, and there's also this funky looking output here. That's the output for an XLR cable. That will allow you to take this microphone and put it into an audio interface, which means this microphone is upgradable when you want to further improve your sound in the future. There are other dynamic USB microphones. One is the ATR 2100, the Audio Technica, but that microphone's been discontinued, and now it's the ATR 2100X, and it's $100 instead of the $60 that it used to be. That's why I'm going to be recommending the Samson. The Samson gets really good sound, it's really easy to set up, and it's really easy to use. The other thing you'll notice if you look at the bottom of the mic here is a little 3.5 millimeter jack. That's to plug headphones into. This Samson mic's pretty nifty. It comes with everything you need to get going. It comes with this little stand that you can put on your desk. These stands I don't find completely useful for everyday podcasting because they're not quite high enough. You have to prop them up on something to reach your mouth. It comes with a little foamy piece to put around the microphone, which is really nice. The other thing you can do if you're going to be podcasting on a regular, everyday basis is to get one of these desk stands, these nifty desk stands, and you can actually pick one up from InnoGear for about $13, and I'll leave the link in this video's description there. But I'm going to go ahead and use this desk stand here because then it's going to allow me to get the microphone nice and close to my face. And let's go ahead and put this foamy piece on. You want to put this foamy piece on the microphone because it will help with the pops or the plosives, the harsh P noises that come from our mouths. And now I can just slide it into the microphone stand, tighten up the microphone stand here so that this is all ready to go, and get this nice and close to my mouth. You're going to get the best sound if this is really close to your mouth. If you're noticing a lot of pop noises, a lot of P noises in your recordings, then you can put the microphone off axis like this so that there's not as much air that goes directly into the microphone. Either way, you're going to want the top of the microphone to point at the sound source, to point at your voice. So I'll put it right here like this, and then I'm going to take the USB cable that comes with the microphone and plug it into the microphone like so. There's an on and off switch right here. And then the other end of the USB, I'm going to go ahead and plug that into my computer like so. And now Let's make sure the on switch is on. See, the light comes on and it is now recognized by the computer. So I'm on a Mac for this demonstration, but this works just as well on a PC. But on a Mac, how you can find this microphone and adjust its settings and just have your computer recognize it is to go to System Preferences. So we'll go to System Preferences here, and then you'll see this icon down here that says Sound. If we click on Sound, you have Output, Input, and Sound Effects. At the output right now, it says Telestream Audio Capture. That's I'm making this tutorial video. But you'll notice here that you can choose, instead of that, you can choose Samson Q2U microphone for the output. That will allow the playback of your computer when you play back your editing software or anything that you're listening to on your computer will come through the microphone, which is pretty cool. And then over here at the input, it says internal microphone. You see the level here, the input level here, that's the internal microphone of my computer picking up my voice. If we go to the Samson Q2U instead, now it's the Samson. And one way you can check to make sure that's working is to tap the microphone. And you'll see as I tap the microphone, the levels go up and down. That's nice. This is how you are actually going to adjust the input volume of your microphone. So as you're talking, if you see that I'm filling up all of these bars, that input volume might be a little too loud. So we can, come down a little bit and test with some big test, test, test. And now when I'm about as loud as I think I'm going to be, I should see the levels not quite reaching all of those bars. Test, test, test. So that's a pretty good level there with that microphone. Maybe down just even a little bit more. So now that we've done that, I'm going to introduce you to a very affordable DAW. A DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation. That's software that we use to record and edit the audio for our podcast. Many podcasters choose the free DAW options. The most popular maybe you've heard of is Audacity. There's also GarageBand that's free on Macs. Myself, I'm not a very big fan of Audacity or GarageBand. I feel like it doesn't really give you all of the tools you need to easily and conveniently edit and record your podcast. However, if you really want a free version, many podcasters, even professional podcasters, still use Audacity to this day, so you can get into that as well. But I'm going to start from scratch. We're going to go to Google Chrome here, and we're going to type in Reaper into the search, and you'll see Reaper Audio Production. We'll go ahead and get that, and we'll say download Reaper. Now this works, like I said, for PC or for Mac. I'm on a Mac, so I just go down here and I'll say OS X 64-bit. So I'm going to go ahead and download the 64-bit for OS X. It opens it up here, and we'll wait for that to download. Okay, now that it's downloaded, I just click on the download link, and it opens up the download prompt. I could say agree after I read the licensing. Now Reaper is free for 60 days. It gives you 2 months to try it out for free, which is great. Now I just drag Reaper into the applications folder like this, and it will install it. Okay, now on a Mac, when you depending on your Mac settings, most Macs will have now just put that in the applications folder. So if you go up here to this drop down menu and go to Go and Applications, this is where you're going to find the application we just installed. So if I scroll down and find Reaper right here, I can drag it and add it to my taskbar down here. Let's put it right next to Audacity here. You just drag it and plop it there, and now I have a shortcut right here on my desktop that will open up Reaper. So let's go ahead and open up Reaper. This tells me, hey, you just downloaded this. Yeah, go ahead and open it. I really like Reaper a lot. I've just started playing with it. I have a lot to learn with it still, but it's very intuitive. Now it says you have not yet selected an audio device. Would you like to select your audio device driver now? Recommended. I'm going to say yes because I know this is plugged into the computer. So I'll say yes. And then here it opens up the Reaper preferences. This is something you can always get to later in your audio devices. It's not very hard to find this. So with the audio device, it says default system devices. Let's go down and click on Samson Q2U. And let's go ahead and make the Reaper screen nice and big. And then let's get familiar with Reaper. Okay, now this is going to seem a little complicated, and there's many steps that we have to follow when it comes to recording a podcast, adding some effects to our voice, maybe making a couple edits, and then finally exporting our finished product to an MP3 file. It can be pretty tricky, it can seem pretty overwhelming, and in this short hour workshop that we're doing, it's not something that I can really do a full tutorial in. So this is going to be more a demonstration of Reaper. Regardless of what DAW you choose, you're going to have to spend some time playing around, fumbling around, and getting used to the DAW that you're using, maybe watching a few YouTube videos. We haven't made any YouTube videos on Reaper yet, but that is in the making. I think Reaper is a wonderful solution. Like I said, it's free for 60 days, and then after 60 days, if you want to continue to use it, it's only $60, a one-time $60 payment. If you compare that to Pro Tools, which is my favorite audio editing software and also the industry standard audio editing software, Pro Tools, to buy the perpetual license, they call it, is $600. So this is 10 times cheaper than Pro Tools, and it gets really good results. So I'm just going to basically give a demonstration and sort of walk through what you would have to do to record a podcast. I'm not going to add any music or sound effects or anything like that. So after I make a couple edits, add some effects to the voice, to my voice here using this microphone, then finally I'll export it to an MP3 and I'll walk you through that whole process. Once we get it exported to an MP3, then it's ready to be uploaded online to our web host. And we're going to cover web hosting later in this workshop. So hang with me. I know it seems like a lot. I'm going to talk about some terms that might make your head hurt, but it's actually, each of those terms are very important to understand, and you just need to take a little bit of time separate from this workshop to understand a little bit of how these effects that we're going to apply to our podcast voices are going to make our voices sound really good and provide a very nice listening experience for our listeners. Okay, so this is really intuitive right from the beginning. You see down here we've got these transport controls, is what these are called. There's a record button, a play button. This right here is a toggle repeat or a loop playback button. That's kind of fun. Stop, pause. Here's our time, and it says it stopped right now. All of this information right here, you can pretty much make sense of what it all means. Also, if you hover over any of these buttons, it shows you what it is. So right here, this is one thing I really like about Reaper. This button right here says auto crossfade enabled. So let's go ahead and set up a track. There aren't any audio tracks here. We need to set up a track. That's very similar in most DAWs. You're going to have to set up a track. How you do that is this open space right here. You simply double click. The other way you can set up a track is to go to track from the drop down menu here, and you'll say insert new track. You can also click that, or look, this gives you a quick key, Command T. That would be Control T on a PC. But here we'll just double click here, and look, it opens a track for us just by double clicking, which is really fun. And then if we arm record, this says record arm or disarm. This is going to put this microphone into record so that it can be recorded.
So now that I have pressed the arm record, you can now see the live level of the Samson microphone coming through here. And that level is really good. We want to check our level and make sure we're getting a strong level to tape, they say. So if the level was down here a little bit and was down hovering over here, that's not a very good level. We want it to be as close to the top as we can without distorting or without going into the red like that. You'll notice when we do distort, Reaper shows us that we've distorted here by keeping a red light on it, saying, hey, you're too loud. You can click that to make it go away. If it's distorting just as you're talking, then you might have to pop back over to your system preferences and go back to sound. And then in your input here, you can adjust that input level to make it quieter so that it's not distorting and you get a good level. Okay, so now we're just going to record a little bit of voice. And you do that by pressing record right here, or you can press Command R or Control R for record on your keyboard. And that's a nice way to do that. So that's a good quick key to remember. So now that I've pressed Command R, I'm doing a mock podcast here, and I have to say that my podcast voice is pretty delicious. If I press the plus or minus key, I can zoom in or out on the Reaper timeline here. So I'm actually pressing the minus key right now and zooming all the way out. You'll see that the timeline is getting smaller. As I press the plus key, the timeline is getting bigger and expanding the waveform more that I can so I can see it. Also down here, you'll see if I hover at the bottom of the track, I get this nifty little dragging icon that appears. If I click and drag, I can also get a nice fat and bigger audio waveform, which I like to see because it makes editing and cutting and things like that a lot easier. Okay, I'm satisfied with this podcast episode. I think it's award-winning. Let's go ahead and stop. Once you press stop, I press spacebar to stop. That's how you can press stop record. You could also press this stop button here. You'll be asked if you want to save this file. You'll also be asked if you want to rename it at this point. I'm going to go ahead and say rename selected. So you select this and say rename selected, and I'm going to say Studio Steve. And we'll put it in Reaper Media. Here's where you can start to organize your files if you want to put your files somewhere else. But Reaper Media is pretty good. That's where all your podcast episodes will stay. If you're going to be doing a lot of podcast episodes, it might be a good idea to create a folder called My Podcast Episodes, maybe month by month if you want, or by year, so you can keep all your files organized. But I'm just going to put it in Reaper Media here. And then we'll go ahead and say save all.
Okay, so two functions that you're going to want to use in any editing situation are trim and split, and that's the same in any DAW. In Reaper here, if you just go to the beginning of any region, you see this icon here. This is our trim icon. By just dragging and selecting, you'll see that it trims here. Now you can also select the region and slide it to the left or right, and that's nice. But if, let's say we want to cut out this middle part here, you can split by pressing the S key for split, which is nice. So I'm going to split right there, and let's make another split there. Now I can just grab this chunk and delete it, and then if I take this, it'll snap right there.
Bigger and expanding the waveform more that I can.
Right, let's say I want to do a couple more of those. You can get really detailed here by zooming all the way in. So let's see if we can find an or some kind of stagger that I didn't like.
Also down here, you'll see if I hover at the bottom of the track, I get this nifty little, okay, I'm satisfied with this podcast episode. I think it's...
Let's just get rid of this okay right here, and we'll pretend that this okay is like an or something we didn't like. So you'll notice we're on the grid here. See how wherever I try to put my cursor, I'm on a grid. You might want to get more detailed than being on a grid. And that's where right here, snap is enabled. If snap isn't enabled, which is this little magnet piece here, you have more control. You're not locked or snapping to the grid. So if I want to get really precise with my split, I can go right there and split that, and then do something like this. And you see how that's automatically applying a crossfade. Over here, it doesn't look like I was automatically applying a crossfade. So I can hold shift like this, bring the cursor back over here, press the plus button in, and now, boom. Holding shift the way I did over here made sure that I moved both of these together. So now I've got a nice crossfade happening, which means there isn't any clips between these two insertion points.
All the way out, bigger and expanding the waveform more.
This is why
so
I would choose Reaper over GarageBand and over Audacity, is for this crossfading alone. Crossfading is very important. Editing is all about providing a good listening experience for our listeners, and we just don't want people to be aware of the editing. So if they hear little clips here and there as we're trying to take out our or trying to merge different regions together, they're going to be like, ooh, what was that clip? And then they become aware of the editing, and it becomes less pleasurable experience for them to listen to. So this is pretty good. Let's go to the end here and see if we can maybe trim this off a little bit. And then look, if I hover my mouse right to the top here, I get this weird little icon. What that is, it's a fade out icon. How nifty is that? So we'll fade it out. And if we hover over to the first of the session, let's give the first of the session a little trim with our trim, and then let's pull that back to the beginning. And you can always go to the beginning of the session at the transport here by doing that. And then now that we've trimmed this up real nice, we can also add a fade at the beginning, and now our podcast episode sounds really good.
So now that I've pressed Command R, I'm doing a mock podcast here.
And that's pretty good. And you'll see with just using good microphone technique, I have the microphone nice and close, and that I have a really nice sounding episode there already. But there's a lot more that goes into now treating our voices so that it's ready to actually go to the podcast directories. And this is what I mentioned can seem a little tricky and a little overwhelming. And we're not going to be able to cover all of this in this brief demonstration here. I just wanted to show you how easy it really is to get going and start messing around with this software and with the USB microphone. But there are effects that you're going to need to become familiar with, and don't let the terms or overwhelm you, but you're going to need to become familiar with compression. You're going to want to know a little bit about EQ. You'll even probably want to know about gates, maybe even de-essers, and then finally a limiter. Right? That's a lot, I know, but it really isn't all that much. First, let's talk about compression briefly. Compression is the most used tool in audio production. What it does is it squeezes or compresses our audio together. It does that by making what's softer a little bit louder and what's louder a little bit softer. This makes our volume more controllable so that we can put it into a nice mix and provide a better experience for our listeners. EQ plays with the frequencies or the color of our sound. So if I have too much of a low rumble in my voice, I can take out just the low part. We're all familiar with EQ if you think about adjusting the lows, mids, and highs on a stereo in your car or something. It's the same thing. You can just adjust the lows, mids, and highs of your voice. And there's a lot that goes into that, but it's really not that difficult, and there's also a lot of presets that can help you with that. Then when it comes to gates and de-essers, that's for a whole nother conversation, and those are a little bit more advanced, and you can get more advanced as you go. The best thing is to get good recordings to tape. So to put yourself in a nice environment where there's not a lot of reverb, maybe you have some curtains, you have some carpet, you don't get a lot of echo, and you don't have a lot of noise or air units running or refrigerators running or anything like that. So you get a nice clean recording. And then if you use good microphone technique where you stay at the same distance and you train yourself to stay at the same distance between your mouth and the microphone, so you're not doing a lot of this as you're talking. Then there's other microphone technique that you'll want to employ as well. So if you're going to laugh, don't laugh right into the microphone. Train yourself to move your head back when you're going to have a big burst of energy and then pop right back in there again. This takes some trial and error, but that's why just get into Reaper right now and start practicing. So I'm simply going to demonstrate what a compressor is and how you can apply a compressor to this voice, and then what a limiter is. Now a limiter is something we put on what's called the master fader, which is down here. The master fader is the left and the right channel. That is what is going to become our MP3 file. That's what we hear in our left and our right ear. So what we do with the limiter is we pump up the overall volume so that the volume is nice and loud but also consistent for our listeners. And that's what a limiter does. So what I'm going to do first here is I'm going to go on this track, which is my voice. There's this button right here that says effects. If I click on that, it brings up all these options of effects I can add. Now Reaper comes with a ton of really cool, really good effects. I'm just going to go down here where it says filter, and I'm going to type in comp for compressor, and it's already going to start to pull up everything, all the compressors that it has. Now there's a lot of different compressors. I really like this 1175 compressor because it's very basic. It only has a couple knobs that you have to adjust, and it's emulating or modeling one of my real favorite compressors in the recording world, which is the Yuri 1176, but they call it the 1175. So if we pull that open here, now we can play and see what's happening with this compressor here.
Best voice is pretty delicious.
Now I'm not going to really get into this, but we do have a video. It's a really good video. I use Veronica as my test subject to show you how compression works. So you can check that video out. We'll leave the link. We'll leave the link on this workshop's description. There's going to be links for compression, for EQ. Just take the time and watch a couple more videos to learn those things.
The waveform more that I can see it. Also down here.
Cool. And then the other thing I would do right here also on this channel is probably add another effect. Here I could say EQ to add another effect. And now here's all these EQs that come up. Real EQ. Let's see what real EQ looks like. oh, this is fun.
Do
Now, I
the-
also did, like I said, a video on EQ that will help you to understand EQ. It's not as complicated. I know all of this looks very nerdy and very complicated, but it's really not. It's not going to take you that long to understand how all these things work, and it's worth it. You want your voice to sound really good. You want your listeners to say, man, that's a good sounding podcast. That's good for your brand, and that's good for the type of podcast you want to produce. Now let's finally add a master limiter so that we have a nice, loud, good sounding track. If we go to the master track here, you'll see there's also an option for effects. We'll click there, and let's type in limit. And you'll see we have a lot of limiters here. There's a master limiter right here that's good. It already has a preset that's pretty nice.
Podcast voice is pretty delicious. If I press the plus or minus key,
and we can put the threshold down, and as we put the threshold down, it's going to get louder.
voice is pretty delicious. If I press the plus or minus,
see, if I go down too low with the threshold, it's going to almost distort it. So we'll just take it down a little bit.
voice is pretty delicious. If I press the plus or minus key,
there's some learning curve to learn how to use limiters properly, but this one just right out of the box is a pretty good one. Just as it comes, it's going to get you closer to a really nice sounding podcast episode. So now if I play it, you'll notice by looking at the master fader down here in the left side, by looking at the master fader, you'll see that it gets a nice hot level, a nice good solid loud level, and I think this is a very good sounding podcast right now.
If I press the plus or minus key, I can zoom in.
My voice is pleasant, it's rich in the frequencies, it's compressed, it's very clear, and I'm in a relatively quiet room here, so it sounds pretty good. So now we're ready to export this to an MP3. So how we do that is we want to make a time selection. You can make a time selection by just grabbing the cursor where your podcast episode starts and where it ends. And we go like that. And now that is what is going to export to an MP3, and we say file and we say render. We're actually going to render this. Now it brings up this render to file, and we have a lot of options here. This is where things might seem a little confusing too, but it's really not that bad. Just go through all these fields. Right now it's saying the source, the master mix. Remember, the master mix is this master fader, so it's going to render it from this master fader. Right here it says bounds. We don't want this to say entire project, but if it said entire project, it'd be okay because there's nothing after this. But what we want to say instead is time selection. That's saying that let's just export the time selection that I've created, which we just created. Then down here we'll give it a file name, and we'll say Studio Steve's Amazing First Episode. And then right here it allows you to choose where you want it. So browse for directory, that's a little strange way of saying browse for a file or where do you want to put this. We'll just throw it on my desktop for now. So we'll say open there, and now it's going to render this file to the desktop. Now down here is the options for how you want it to export. Right here it says format WAV. We need this to be MP3. So we're going to change it to MP3, and then 128 kilobits per second is what kbps means. That's perfect. That's what we want it as. There's other options here, but most web hosts love this 128 kilobits. And so keep that at 128 kilobits per second as an MP3, then say render one file. There it goes. It rendered our file. Reaper render complete. And then we can say close here. And now let's just go check on that file. I'm going to minimize this. And look, we have our Studio Steve's Amazing First Episode. If I double click on it, it'll open up in iTunes and we can listen to it.
So now that I've pressed Command R, I'm doing a mock podcast here.
If it sounds good in iTunes, if it sounds good as just listening to this MP3 file, it's going to sound great on the podcast directories. So hopefully that wasn't too much for you. Hang in there. Really, the best way to get started is to just download Reaper. It's free to download. You have 2 months to play around with it before you have to pay anything for it. And just start messing around in there. Plug in your microphone and start making sense of how it works. Watch a couple of YouTube videos. You'll be up and running in no time. When you get to the point where you're ready to add those extra bits, those extra percentages of sound quality to your mixes, that's when you're going to want to look into what a de-esser is, what a gate is, and then you're also going to want to add music to your mix there, add music tracks and have a nice intro and nice outros. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this workshop. But as you can see, there's a lot that goes into making a really good podcast episode, but you don't have to start with all of that. It can be as simple as a nice intro. Hey, welcome to my podcast. This is what you can expect out of my podcast, with a little bit of music. Then the music fades out and you do your podcast episode. And then maybe you have a little music come back in at the end. Thanks for tuning in today. Make sure you follow me on social media, rate, review, and subscribe, and all of the administrative pieces that you need to say. Also, finally, with those administrative pieces or those intro and outro pieces, you can create a Reaper session or a Reaper project and spend time with music and everything else designing a really nice outro, and then export that. And you wouldn't have to export as an MP3. You can export that as a wave and keep it in a file somewhere. I do that, and I would call it like Pod Sound School Podcast Assets or PSS Assets. What I mean by assets these are the little pieces that I'm going to be using in all of my episodes or a lot of my episodes. So then when you open up a new Reaper project for each episode, you can import one of those assets, or you can import the intro piece and the outro piece into your Reaper session, and it's ready to go every time. So that's a really good way to do it. And we're going to touch on that a little bit more, but I hope this wasn't too overwhelming, and let's get back to me and Veronica in the future. Okay, guys, let's talk about some...
All right.
Congratulations! You made it to the other side.
You made it to the other side.
You conquered.
I mean, I don't know any better way to just give you a crash course there. I probably could have sped that up a little bit, but I think one thing that does illustrate and can be disheartening for people is just how much actually goes into editing. So one thing I didn't mention in that video is you can also hire people to edit your podcast episodes if you have the extra funds for that. Again, with Fiverr, there's people on Fiverr that do it.
But it's also good to learn the fundamentals so you can have that communication with your editor.
Yes, regardless, you need to learn the fundamentals. And then, like Veronica mentioned earlier, too, we are coming out with a course in May where there's going to be modules and a very easy framework to follow with all of this stuff. Our intention here isn't to overwhelm you, but to excite you. Or discourage you. So why don't we finish up with talking about Web host.
Take it away.
So with web hosts, we're looking, and I'm sure you're ready for Veronica's voice now instead of mine. But with web hosts, we're talking about ease of use. Is it easy to use? Does it have an intuitive dashboard? And then the other criteria that we really want in a web host is attractive embed players and then detailed analytics. That might be some more lingo that you're not familiar with, but a web host is a company or a website that we take that MP3 we just created and that they hold on to our MP3 files. Then they generate those MP3 files into something called an RSS feed. That is what we share with iTunes, with Apple, with Spotify, with Google Podcasts, with Stitcher, with Overcast, all of them. They look to that RSS feed, which is really cool because we don't have to upload our file to all of those different directories. We just upload it to our web host.
And they gather analytics from
and then they gather
audiences.
Analytics. And that's why a good web host, those analytics are very important because we want to know how people are responding to our episodes. And we can tell after 15 episodes which ones people really liked. And it's like, let's make more of those.
Yeah, also if we want to approach sponsors, if we are thinking about, whatever we're thinking about, any way of monetizing, you're going to need those analytics.
Yeah, not to mention, it's really fun. Like we, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, got 20, 30 new listeners in New Mexico. And that's really fun. So you want analytics that show you geo analytics, where people are listening from, what devices they're on, things like that.
Which is your favorite host?
Okay, well, so the other consideration is free versus paid hosts and our favorites. So there are some hosts that you can get started with for free. Anchor is one of those. They have really good analytics actually and a bunch of different options. With Anchor, you can actually start using your phone and then graduate to using things like Reaper and better audio software and then still use Anchor to host your podcast. Another really good one to start for free with is Podbean. So those are my two favorites as far as the free one goes. Podbean lets you be free to a certain extent with certain limitations. But then, and there's a couple other ones that do it for free too. And then the paid ones that are my favorite would be Simplecast is my top choice, and Buzzsprout is my second choice, and then my third choice would be Libsyn, and then my fourth choice would be Blueberry. And Blueberry is, I say Blueberry because it's spelled B-U-L Blueberry, B-R-R-Y or something. It's spelled weird. It's not Blueberry, it's Blueberry.
Blueberry.
All of those are really good. And Blueberry has some very good analytics. They all have very good analytics. But the other criteria I said is ease of use, attractive embed players. That's to where you can embed and other people can embed your episode or your whole show player onto the different web pages and things. And Simplecast has really sexy looking embed players, and Buzzsprout has really nice ones too. So we also have a video about our favorite web hosts of 2019. We just did that you can check out here. So we'll make sure to leave those links. And make sure you check the links here. There's going to be a lot of resources here. I know this was a lot. It's getting to be about an hour and a half. But if you check the links of all these resources, we're going to put the slides to this presentation in there. And we're also going to throw a free download for our podcast Jumpstart, which is really cool. So that you can, follow along, and you can see that it takes a lot of work. But if you want to just get through it and you're do-it-yourselfer, then this little workshop, you'll find it to be very useful. Otherwise, get on the waiting list for our course, and we'll help you come out of the gates. 6 weeks intensive course, right? Now let's move on and talk about, hopefully in your voice more. 'Cause I can't hear my own voice anymore. Let's talk about launch strategy.
So our last thing for today is launch strategy. And so you've done everything up until this point. You have your podcast episodes recorded. We advise you and advise our clients to pick a date. That's very important. Because when you pick a date and then you share that date on your social media, you start creating buzz around your launch, and you start, sharing that date with your followers, with your potential listeners. Then it's kind of set in stone, and you know that you have to meet that deadline. Choose and build 2 social medias. We have 4 or 5 videos about Twitter and Instagram. Those are our 2 main platforms.
And this goes back to when we're talking about finding your ideal listener and your niche. When you do that research about them, find out what social platform your ideal listener hangs out on.
Yes.
Are they on Twitter? Are they on Facebook? Because you don't want to just put out a bunch of social media promotion for crickets or for people who aren't really interested in you.
Yeah,
So-
that's very important. It's also very important to start your social media at least a month before your launch and start engaging and posting content and
following people.
and engaging with people and telling people about the launch of your podcast and what your podcast is about. And just create events around this big days, big day. Create a buzz. I post regularly. Also, like, play by the rules of the platform. If you're on Instagram, a lot of Instagram stories, hashtags, a lot of Instagram stories. What?
You're fine. Sorry.
Okay. Well, your finger was.
I know.
A lot of Instagram stories and hashtags and posts and posts and captions that are relevant to those posts. And if you're on Twitter, then Twitter is another different strategy. It's more like micro blogs, micro content, and I don't know what you want to say about Twitter. You are the expert about Twitter. But just make sure that you start a month in advance, and also make sure that you have a trailer for your podcast, and that you that you submit that trailer to the different podcast directories, so you can send people to subscribe to your podcast, and they can get informed about what your podcast is about. Trailers should be no longer than a minute
or 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
And that's something we didn't put in this slide here. We'll add it to the slide to be downloaded. Is to create a trailer. The biggest reason for that to create a trailer, well, there's lots of reasons, but it gives people an opportunity to go over there and subscribe before your show even goes live. But also, when you're submitting your podcast to Apple and to other directories, it can take a while. Apple can take all the way up to 2 to 3 weeks for them to accept your show. And so it's kind of hard to set a specific launch date when you're waiting for Apple, right? So a couple weeks, 3 weeks before your launch date, make sure you have a trailer recorded. And then with that trailer on your podcast host, that's enough for iTunes to look at your podcast and decide whether to accept it or not, right? So, and then finally, plan a launch party.
Yes.
So after
you worked so hard. You put in the work. You're learning all these technical things.
Yeah.
You're learning about branding, marketing, and you're launching your podcast. It's a big
it's a big
thing.
deal. Make a
big event.
Have fun, and maybe
grab your kombucha, grab your wine if you're a drinker or whatever, the drink of choice.
And then
Aguapanela, mazamorra.
and then grab, and then if you could also go live on your social media channel.
Grab your aguapanela.
Have a
I'm sorry, I
listening
had
party.
to say it again.
There's all sorts of fun things you could do, and think about ways you could do that. Maybe you can go to a live.
Bring your Colombian friends.
Anything you could do, and then also
Light up the party.
The other thing you could do after your launch is to arrange some rate review swaps with other podcaster friends that you've made on social media. Say, hey, will you come over and rate my podcast? Give me a rating on Podchaser or on Apple, and I'll do the same for you. That helps to give you a little bit more of a buzz there too. And
something important if you want to see growth is not only focus on the content, and content is important, but what's most important is to promote and put a lot of effort into promotion so people can see that piece of art, that beautiful content.
So when we go all the way back to that planning and development again, it's during that process that you want to plan, like, okay, each week I don't just have to put out a podcast episode. I also have to put aside a certain amount of hours to promote that episode, but not just promote the episode, but just to engage and be active on my 2 social platforms that I'm going to start with. And if you have a co-host, you can talk among each other to sort of, share the work, share the workload, right?
Yeah.
So as you can see, there's a lot that goes into this.
Yes.
And if you want to learn more or you want to get signed up with our waiting list for our course, you can go to podcastingsmart.com.
Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We release videos every week.
I'm going to be putting out some Reaper videos, since Reaper, I've been looking for a cheap alternative to Audacity because I don't like Audacity. And so I'm going to be a proponent of Reaper and then Pro Tools. Those are my 2 go-tos for editing. Once you learn, those editing programs are going to save you time. Subscribe here to our channel. I hope you guys had a lot of fun. Let's see. Great show. Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you. If I record in Reaper, is it easy to send this to an editor who doesn't use Reaper? That's a great question. Yes, there is a way to do that. You just basically, there's a way that says export in Reaper, and it says export and consolidate, and it will export your files, and then you can send that right over to, they can open it up in any editing software. So if they're going to do some mastering or something else, so it's a great way to work in Reaper. So Reaper's a really good consideration for sure. And then that wraps it up. So thank you guys so much. And
you made it to the other side. Congratulations.
You made it to the other side. And make sure that when you launch your podcast, or if you're struggling with your name, or if you're struggling with finding your ideal listener, hit us up. We are here to help you. Veronica is on Instagram at Pod Sound School. She responds to her DMs. I'm over on Twitter. You can find me at Pod Sound School over there too.
Also, get on the wait list for our course.
Get on the wait list for our course. There's no obligation there. It's just your email, and what that does is reserve a spot for you. So go ahead and reserve a spot if you want. And until next time, you guys, happy casting.
Happy casting.
It only took us an hour and a half, but I have to say, not to toot our own horns, that was a lot we crammed into an hour and a half. You can see why you really need a 6-week course, probably.
Yeah.
But anyway, good luck with you, and
stay safe.
Stay safe and stay positive.
Somebody's knocking on the door.
I know, but stay positive and everything else. We've got our kids that are busting down the door. We've got to go address that situation. We love you guys, and happy casting.
Happy casting.